to the Impact Ripple podcast, the go-to source for hiring and leadership made simple, doable, and fun for visionary female business owners. I'm your host, Ashley Cox, author, certified HR expert, and founder of Sprout HR. And I believe that you don't have to change who you are to be a great leader because you already are one. Join me as we kiss uncertainty and overwhelm goodbye and say hello to the tools and support you need to grow a profitable, sustainable, impactful team with more confidence and ease. On today's episode, Janna Browning joins me for an enlightening conversation about the power of our stories in team building and creating belonging in our businesses. Janna Browning is a seasoned drama therapist, director, and co-founder of Integrative Storyworks, a company that uses personal story to build community. In California, Janna worked with Armand Volkas in his work Healing the Wounds of History, which uses expressive arts therapy to work with groups that share a common legacy of historical trauma. Janna also worked with Community Performance International, a company specializing in community building across lines of difference, using the stories of a community in large-scale theater performances. In this episode, Janna shares why stories are an integral part of creating belonging, the importance of cross-cultural conflict resolution, and how businesses can reduce turnover, quiet quitting, and a host of other challenges through embodied empathy. My favorite part of the conversation are all the ways in which our stories allow us to build more compassion, empathy, and understanding as humans working with humans. So you are definitely not going to want to miss this conversation. So let's get started with Janna Browning. Welcome, Janna. I am so excited to have you on the Impact Ripple podcast today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
You are so welcome. So for our listeners, Janna and I actually met earlier this year at an International Women's Day luncheon. So we're still in 2023. It's November when we're recording this. And I think that luncheon was in February, right? February or March?
Yes. I think it was
Yeah.
March.
Yeah. I know it was still chilly outside. I remember having a jacket on. And we just hit it off right away. We sat at the same table. And as soon as I started asking Janna what she did, I was enthralled. And we actually went and had coffee later. And we've done a couple of collaborations since then. And we've just really continued to be in each other's orbits. And I am so pumped to be able to bring her and her brilliance to the Impact Ripple audience today. So today we're talking about how stories can build teams and belonging. And if that doesn't hook you in, I don't know what else will, because it combines two of my favorite things, storytelling and the art of connecting through our shared experiences, and team building and belonging and company culture. So over the summer, I actually hosted a one-day retreat with Janna, and she came and taught us her story process. And I tell you what, every single woman in that room continues to talk about this. I think we had that event in June or July, and I still have women saying, that workshop that we did with Janna, it was brilliant. It was amazing. I got so much value from that. So thank you, Janna, for bringing that experience to us live and allowing us to experience and participate in it.
Yeah, thank you. It was so much fun. It was an honor.
Yeah. So I told Janna, I was like, oh my gosh, this process was too brilliant to keep to ourselves. And so that's why she's here with us today. So I'm not going to steal too much of Janna's thunder because she is going to share all about, the work that she does with us. And I think she's probably better positioned to tell exactly what it is that she does and how she helps to build teams and belonging. But I'm going to pop in with my own experience as well so that you can kind of see from a participant side what I was going through and what I was experiencing throughout this workshop with Janna. So let's dive in. Okay, Janna, I always like to start off with the same question, which is just tell us a little bit about your journey and how you came to be doing this incredibly fascinating work that you do today.
Okay, thank you. So I started off as an actor and really loved theater and film, and went. I got my undergraduate degree in acting, and I guess that was really when it started. When I was in college, I took a performing arts class, and I it was theater for social change. And
Mm,
so we were learning about projects where um, per- performing arts was being brought into different situations. And one particular one was a prison in Barcelona, a female prison in Barcelona. And this project that they started doing around Emily Dickinson's poetry and the stories of the women, and how those related, and the impact that it had on these female inmates. And I was sitting in the middle of the front row of the classroom, and by 10 to 15 minutes in it, I was sobbing. I
mm,
was like the only one in the room that was just could not contain myself. And it moved me so deeply. And I decided that was really where I wanted to go with my work, was to use the performing arts to make people's lives better. So I didn't know how to do that. And so after I graduated with my undergrad, I was sort of in this little panic of what am I going to do with my life and how I'm going to make this happen. But then I stumbled on drama therapy,
mm,
and it was the perfect fit. Um, and as I was looking on into how I was going to get my graduate degree, I found Armand Volkas, who ended up being my mentor. And he works in a company that he created called Healing the Wounds of History. And his story is amazing, and I have to share it. I'll give you the very short version of it. But his parents were resistance fighters in the Holocaust,
mm.
and they actually met in Auschwitz and fell in love.
Wow.
And so they were separated, sent to different camps, and then found each other after the war ended, and um, moved to the LA area of Southern California, which is where Armand grew up. And he was struggling with how to deal with this legacy of
Mm,
trauma that he had inherited in this place like LA, which has got, it's a very surface oriented
mm,
place. Um, and so he ended up creating a theater group with children of Holocaust survivors and children of Third Reich officers.
mm,
And they created theater pieces, um, kind of processing the shared legacy. And so his work came out of that. And that was really what interested me, which was cross cultural conflict resolution
mm,
through theater and performing arts. So I ended up going to the California Institute of Integral Studies, and I got my master's in drama therapy. And I started working with Armand, doing cross cultural conflict resolution. And we would do these projects where, like, I'll give an example. This was 20 years ago or something, a long time ago. But it was a group with Turks and Armenians, and so the Armenians were descendants of the Armenian genocide that happened around World War One,
mhm,
and then Turkish folks who were actually from Turkey, where at the time um, someone had gotten assassinated just in the months before, because a journalist, because they were talking about the genocide. It's illegal to discuss the genocide in Turkey. So there was real repercussions
mhm,
around coming to this workshop. They walked in and there was so much tension.
mm,
They immediately went to opposite sides of the room, would not talk to each other. And through this process of sharing stories, within one day, they were friends and hugging and crying together, and had totally transformed. And so that's how I got started in seeing the power of story, and working in groups that have really extreme conflict and history of conflict, that are walking into the room um, really dehumanizing each other. And the
Sure.
way in which story broke down those barriers so quickly, that that was where I began. And then I began working with Jules Corriere, who's my partner in our company, Integrative Storyworks. And we began working in communities, doing large scale theater performances with the community stories. So we gather the stories of the community and write a play and cast the community in the play, telling the stories of their neighbors and their grandparents, and then perform them for this show, these theater pieces for the community. And that's where we started. And as things have evolved, we're moving into organizational aspects of creating community building, culture building, team building, like you said, because we've seen amazing transformations happen with this work.
Oh, I love this. What a powerful story and journey in and of itself, to where you started and so uncertain about, what am I going to do with my life? What am I going to do with this degree and the knowledge that I have already? And then that transpiring and kind of evolving through, working with Armand, and then starting with community stories, and then bringing that into organizations. And I promise that if you ever go through a workshop with Janna, you will cry, 100%. I don't think there was a dry eye in the room that we went through this story process, because it really gets to the root of our humanity.
Mhm.
It gets to the ways in which we live and have experienced and have learned in this world. And it's really confronting when you are talking to other people whose lived experiences are very different, and not confronting necessarily in a bad way, but in an eye-opening way, in an awe-inspiring way, in a shock, and sometimes, wow, that's really what happened. That's your experience. So I think that that's one of the things that was so profound to me, and to, I know, a lot of the other women in the room, was, even though we had a certain level of familiarity and comfortability with one another, we all were surprised by the stories that were shared. Can you talk a little bit more about how stories help us to connect and to empathize, and why that feels like such an emotional experience?
Well, we're storied beings. So our experience in the world is all about the stories we tell ourselves about our life. And it's about the stories that were passed down to us from our parents or the culture. And when something happens and you're thinking about it, you're telling yourself a story about what happened. And so that's how we process information. It's how we process our emotions. It's how we process our experiences. And so it's really the building blocks of who we are. And I think what's really special and unique about this process, um, is that it is giving us an opportunity to really hear each other.
Mm,
Um, when you were speaking about the workshop, and you were saying how um, you kind of knew each other, but there's some way in which it brought something deeper out, and a way in which you heard each other. Did that really happen? Or, oh my gosh, I haven't thought about it that way.
mhm,
There's something about the way in which we build this sort of container and process, that we're, a lot of times I think when people come in and they have this agenda, like, I want you to hear me. Especially when you're talking about DEI work or differences, um, there's a way in which it can kind of bring up an initial defense. Like,
Mm.
I have to protect my story. And if your story's right, and that did happen to you, then my story's wrong.
Mm.
Um, so I think the key is creating an environment where it's not about whose story's right or my story versus your story. It's let's listen to each other and step into each other's story. And it has when you actually are really putting yourself in someone's story, something changes. That's the act of empathy. That's what empathy is stepping into someone's shoes, taking a walk in their journey. And so by that very nature, we start to empathize with each other. We start to humanize each other. And it's really hard to hate or be defended against somebody you start caring about. And part of that key is that you're hearing their story, but they're hearing your story, and it's that mutual exchange. I think that's really important. It's not one story that's being elevated. It's everyone has a story, and everyone's story is worth listening to.
Yeah. I think one of the things that was so important about the workshop was that we sat and we listened to others' stories without interruption. And how often do we as human beings do that with anyone,
Right.
let alone the people that we work with? And
Mhm.
so I think so much understanding of others is lost because we don't have or we don't create the opportunities to really listen and hear other people's stories. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. It's funny. Um, in therapy, when you're learning about therapeutic communication, for me, one of the first like huge lessons I learned was the importance of silence and letting
Mm.
someone else speak. um, it's not the way we naturally talk to each other. We are adding in our own experiences or clarifying with questions, and um, which is all great. But when you sit quietly and without interruption and really let somebody go into a story, um, you're giving them the space to really go deeply into an experience that we don't often have those moments to really go deep. Um, and it's always a surprise what comes up. Um, I don't. I think that our question um, was a pretty easy one. I don't think it was something about we often do stories about overcoming or resilience.
Mhm,
They don't have to be about trauma.
mhm.
We like to have a kind of a positive. How did you get through something?
Yeah. Yeah, you don't wanna necessarily go in with the most trauma-filled
Right.
experience you've ever had in your life because chances are that you're probably, number 1, not gonna be comfortable sharing that level of intimacy
Exactly.
with people that you sorta kinda know, maybe you're familiar with. But I think the other thing is too that it built a level of comfortability with us having shared stories. I think our question revolved around, a time where you overcame a challenging hurdle or something. And I
Mhm.
remember my story that I shared was about starting this podcast because from a young age, I was always in trouble for talking too much. In class. I was forever sitting by the teacher. I was at the whiteboard. I was in the corner. I had comments on my report cards home. And my ninth grade teacher was probably the kindest about it, where he said, Ashley is a very sociable young lady, which just basically meant she talks too much. And so for years, I've fought that battle of
Mhm.
you're talking too much, you're too much, you're too much, you should be seen and not heard. And so for me to have started a podcast was overcoming a huge lifelong battle of sharing my voice, of feeling like what I had to share was important enough to put out there. And so it was not the same story that other people shared, but there was a similar thread of how something that happened or was told to us in childhood was holding us back in some way,
Mhm.
shape, or form, and how we had gotten up the courage or the gumption or the resiliency or the tenacity or the perseverance or whatever it was to be able to say, and I'm not going to let that story continue to define me.
Yes. And it's amazing how themes bubble up from a group organically.
Mm,
When we work in communities, the stories we get are different, but they from community to community. They're
mm,
different stories, but they're stories that reflect what's happening in that community. And the same thing in an organization. It's amazing how our unconscious minds work. Um, we end up telling the stories that need to be told and the
mm,
stories that are connected to the people around us. And there's sort of this collective energy that happens, and
mm,
it's every time it's miraculous. It's always just so interesting and exciting to
mm.
see what bubbles up in any given group.
Yeah. Yeah. I think one of the themes that really felt prominent in our session, and this was a session for those who obviously weren't there with us. It was a session with women business owners. And one of the themes was that silencing, the
Mhm.
silencing of women's voices, the silencing of women's experiences. I remember we had, someone shared about their parent silencing their ambition. Someone shared about a racial silencing where their voice wasn't welcome in a forum. And so it was a very broad range of experiences and stories, and our backgrounds and our racial ethnicities, and where we grew up and where we lived in the world. And it still came down to, wow, we're all feeling silenced.
Yep.
And so it's like our stories, while vastly different, allowed us to have this founding point or this grounding point where we could all come together and say, yeah, I
Yeah.
understand that.
Mhm. And then we start when we feel that energy of, yeah, that's me. I feel
Mm,
that it was different, a different flavor of the
mhm,
same thing. And you heard me and my flavor,
mhm,
and I heard your experience, and then it creates this connection, um, and this understanding, and that becomes a foundation that then really amazing things can be built from. Um, I think that's one of the things about this addition of belonging to DEI work that
mhm,
is really vital. We have to start with our relationships. We have to start with that humanization, that connection, and then we can build on that and go amazing places. But if we don't start there with that basic
mhm.
connection, all those interventions aren't going to do much.
Yeah.
I think that's
Yeah.
really important. And the way we connect is through story and through
Yeah.
empathy.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. What do you think is the most challenging part of the work that you're doing?
Um, I think the thing that I constantly am coming up against is this like kind of elevator speech, trying to put all
Mhm,
that happens in the process into a sentence or two, or trying to communicate the vastness of it.
mm,
It's a very experiential process,
mhm,
and it's hard to describe. It's something definitely that's best communicated through
mhm,
experiencing it. Um, And so, I think for us as a company, the
Mhm.
challenge of trying to express what we do in, a concise way, in a way that people get, um, it's been really hard, and continues to be hard. I think that if people have an opportunity to experience even a short version of it, or talk to someone who's experienced it, then that seems to work better. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's definitely a challenge for us.
Yeah, I know, it was interesting because I've been on both sides of this now. I've been on the, "What do you do, Janna?" And, Janna trying to go, well, I do this thing and it's really amazing, and, like, you just have to experience it," and I've experienced it, and yes, it is very much something that you have to experience, and I also think that this is exactly what we need more of within teams, and so if I could distill this down into, a sentence or two,
Mhm,
it's very much a an opportunity to share stories to create common ground and bring people together.
mhm.
Like, that might be one of the simplest ways I might just off the cuff, because I did not plan this in preparation for our conversation today, but just kind of thinking about it over the past few months, and I think that that's the part where, if you've not been involved in drama or acting or storytelling in some way, shape, or form at some point in your life, you might have a harder time grasping what exactly that looks like,
Yeah.
what exactly that entails. There might be some, maybe, fear, like, this feels too nebulous. I can't get my arms around it. So
Mhm.
I didn't tell you that I was gonna ask this question because I didn't know I was gonna ask this question. But I would love if you might be able to give our audience some insight into what a workshop day looks like. What might they expect? So that way it kind of pulls down some of those fear barriers that we put up when we're like, whoops, that's unknown. I'm not sure I want to go there. And just kind of walk us through what one of your typical story process workshops looks like.
Yeah. I wanna I will say that I'll answer the question, and
Mhm.
I'm also going to be purposefully um maybe not fully disclosing, because I think there's something in the magic of the way you don't know what's going to happen,
Yes.
and it
Give us enough of a teaser
I'll
to
give
be
you a
like,
teaser
here's
so that,
here's
because I
kind of
think
what to
I don't
expect, but
wanna
don't give away
let
all the
too much
goods.
out. Yeah.
Yeah, don't give away all the goods, because it very much is like, wait, what? We're gonna do what now?
Exactly. And
That's
then
part of the fun and part of the breaking down, I
yeah,
think, of the barriers.
I would say I'm gonna give it kind of an analogy.
Oh,
So,
perfect.
um, so team building is, historically, you do, share task work, like,
Mhm,
you know, um, going and doing a ropes course together,
mhm.
or right now there's these escape rooms,
Yes.
right? That's a big,
Like, we're
uh,
solving problems
we're
together.
solving a problem
Yes.
together. And studies show that that really does create some connection, and it makes people, there's this, it's, you got a certain amount of time.
Mhm.
So you got that pressure
Kind of that
cooker
pressure. Yeah.
of the time, and you've got to get through it. So there's an element of that in our process, and it's a game, so it's fun.
Mhm,
And I think that's another part of what is unique and exciting about it, is that it doesn't feel, it's not a lecture.
mhm.
It's not something where you're just like, can I get to the other end of this?"
Yeah, it's not like
Um,
a webinar training, you're not gonna have a
yes,
quiz at the end, it's not
exactly.
it's not that typical sort of DEI checkbox activities, which is why I kept telling Janna, I was like, this is beyond DEI. This is way beyond DEI. And I
Yeah,
think that's where the belonging really comes in.
exactly.
It's the community building aspect.
Right. It's really what I feel like the first step of DEI work needs to be is that
Mhm.
relationship building. Um, but it's a we're play is how mammals learn.
Mhm.
We all have played as a kid.
I
Um,
still play. I don't know about all y'all, but
yeah,
I still play lots.
and it's so important that we still
Yeah.
play. And so so what we're asking people to do is to kind of step into their imagination,
Mhm.
to step into their memories, and play together. And that in and of itself can sound pretty scary.
Mhm.
Adults often are like, "Ooh, play together? What does that mean? I don't
It's
know."
really fun. I'm not gonna give
Yeah,
away all Janna's secret sauce here either, but it's really fun,
it
and
is
it's
fun.
also interesting to watch everyone around the room as they respond and react to the prompts that Janna's giving.
Right.
It's like, you've got some people who are like, "Wait, what? We're doing what?" And then you have some that are like, "Oh my gosh, this is so fun."
And there's room for all of it
Mhm,
in the process.
mhm,
You just bring yourself,
mhm,
and that's really all you have to do, is just show up. And um, so what we're doing is creating that time pressure, um, that shared task, and then we're asking people to share stories. Um, and everybody gets to share a story. People are in complete control of what story they share and how they share it.
mhm.
So we're not asking people to share things that they might not feel comfortable sharing or going places they don't want to go.
Yeah, there was a lot of comfortability built into the process, and I think
Right.
that was something I was acutely aware of because there's times where you find yourself in situations where you're kind of being pressured to share
Hmm.
things that you're not ready to share or talk
Hmm.
about stuff that's not comfortable for you to talk about, or maybe you don't get to participate, maybe you wanted to share but you didn't get the opportunity. And I think that it's beautiful the way that you've built this to include all of those things in a super non-pressured way.
Yeah, it's so important.
Mhm,
You got to move. You got to move at the speed of trust, and
mhm,
part of what we're building is trust.
mhm,
And to come out right off the bat and ask people to tell their most heartbreaking or vulnerable stories is
mhm.
not what we're doing, and wouldn't be appropriate,
Yeah.
because you don't get to that until you've done those first steps
Mhm.
of sharing and building that
Yeah.
trust. So
Yeah.
we that's really important to us that people feel, um, that they're able to speak their truth in the way that and in the time that they're ready to.
Mhm.
And if it's a short workshop, we're not going to get to we don't want to go to those really
Yeah.
vulnerable places.
Yeah.
We're just looking to build connection.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I think ours
so
was 90 minutes to 2 hours. So
yeah.
it's a perfectly easy time. It doesn't take days and weeks and
Mm,
years to have this massive transformation and these big aha moments and this profound understanding and deep learning. That I think that's one of the coolest things about your program work is that it can have such transformational change in such a small amount of time.
yeah,
And it just gets to compound over and over and over. The more you do the work, the deeper that you go. And I think too
exactly.
often a lot of DEI programs and other team building programs, not just DEI programs, but like team building programs in general, they're either too surface level
Hmm.
and they don't get down to any of the meat of what makes us tick as humans, or they try to go all the way in and they scare the bejesus out of everybody. And then
Mhm.
everybody's defense mechanisms and walls go up and they're like, not me, I'm out. I don't want to do this. This is too vulnerable. And
Yeah,
I think this was such a beautiful balance of just enough to start building that empathy and that understanding and that belonging and that, hey, me too sort of feeling.
yeah. Oh, I'm glad that you felt that way. That's really what we are intending.
Mm,
And like you said, it's kind of one of those things that depending on the time that you have available, if you have 90 minutes,
Mhm.
we can make that work. If you have 6 months,
Mhm.
we can make that work. And
Yeah.
the more time, the
Mhm.
deeper it'll go, and the bigger, obviously, this final product is, which is sort of that task that we're alluding to, that you're working towards something, and that something depends a lot on the time and the
Mhm.
resources and what you can put into it. But as little as 90 minutes, and as we've had projects that have lasted years,
Yeah.
and there's a way that we can work within that time frame and
Yeah.
within those resources.
Well, and
um,
team building doesn't just happen once and everybody's copacetic.
exactly.
Team building is an ongoing opportunity because what a lot of folks don't think about is that your team is going to always be evolving,
Exactly.
even if your team members never change, because they're going to have different experiences. They're going to have different um, lessons that they've learned. They're going to have different exposures. They're going to have different challenges and successes that they've faced. And every single instance is going to create an evolution in that
Mhm.
person, which is going to bring more stories to the table, right?
Exactly. And what we do is we create relationship and connection. And relationships take effort and they take maintenance.
Hmm.
Um, you don't just have one experience with a person and no more and maintain that connection. You have to continue to invest. And so, yeah, absolutely. Um, and I think it's particularly a great model for people in organizations right now with the amount of turnover that's been
Hmm.
happening since COVID. Um, creating, maintaining a culture um, in your organization when you have such people coming in and out.
Hmm.
Um, I think that I've seen that a lot, with people they're that what was their culture pre-COVID
Mm.
has really shifted for
Yeah.
various reasons. I mean, we've all went through this massive collective trauma together,
Hmm.
and it's still shaking out. Um, so being able to maintain those connections, maintain the culture of belonging, I think is really vital. Whether
Hmm.
it's an organization or a community or a group of friends, whatever, we've
Yeah,
got to keep investing in those relationships and connections.
for sure. For sure. I think, you know, this work would be so beneficial for leadership teams to go through
Mhm.
together to really hone that culture and to get on the same page and to really understand how one another works. It would be great for colleagues to go together who are working side by side or cross functionally in different departments. I know one of the biggest challenges, especially when I was in the corporate world, I don't see it as much in the small business world because, well, everybody's doing everything. But in the corporate world, you very much had those silos. You had
Mhm.
teams that were working independently on projects that were interdependent. And
Exactly.
there was a lot of, well, we own this and stay out of this and don't talk to us and we need to get this done and we need your part and you don't want to give it to us. And there was a lot of that very contentious sort of I don't know, almost like territorial behavior.
Mhm.
And I think this could be such a beautiful opportunity for companies that are struggling with those silos or they're struggling with team members who don't want to work together or they've been challenged in working together, to build some bridges and to build some community. And just like you said earlier, oh gosh, I wrote it down and now I can't read it. You might have to remind me of what this actually says. Cross cultural.
Conflict resolution.
Yes, that's it.
Mhm.
Cross-cultural conflict resolution. I was trying to write notes and not look at my notepad. It did not work for me. But I think that just kind of goes back to if you are having, if you have a team that is struggling to get along, regardless of whether you're a team of 4 or 5 people or you're a team of 4,500 people. It doesn't matter how many people you have working together. Anywhere there's more than one person working, there will be conflict at some
Absolutely.
point.
Absolutely.
Always. But if you're having and experiencing a greater level of conflict within your team, or you're still trying to figure out, like, why can't I get people to work together? Why are people, turning over? Why am I losing so many people? Why am I having a lot of turnover? A lot of these problems and a lot of these challenges that you're facing, number one, aren't unusual. So don't feel like you're bad, you're wrong, you're, not cut out to be a leader. I don't want anybody to think that. But they're things that are easily diagnosed. And we have a really amazing solution here with Janna and with her program and with building, stronger teams with empathy, with understanding, with belonging. And I just think that this work is so, so powerful. And every single company in the whole world needs to go through it. I'll just wrap my thought up with that.
Yeah, I think yeah, when I look at like an organization, and I know, I mean, it can get so complicated. I mean, I'll like for an example, in healthcare, you'll have like the emergency room.
Mhm,
You have so many layers of different people, like you said, who are on different teams, whether it's the nurses and the doctors and the people who are cleaning the rooms, and they're working in the same place, but they might be kind of just missing each other. And they're coming from such different tasks and
mhm,
um, backgrounds. So being able to take this process and connecting the doctor and the person who's cleaning the room and the nurse and the CNA, like all those people coming together and and being a family is really kind of what it does. The way that when you come out of the process, you're connected with people. You care about them. You know their name. You know a little bit about who they are. And that's essential for
mhm,
any kind of working um, group of people, whether it's working as a community or a
mhm,
family or a company. You've got to have those connections. And when I hear stories of organizations that are really having these big problems, I remind myself about that cross-cultural conflict resolution piece,
mhm,
and how I've seen it with Palestinian and Israelis. We are having is
mhm.
I've worked in that group, and talk about a hard problem. We're seeing that right now,
Yeah.
in a really awful way. But to be able to get people that polarized
Mhm,
in a room and come out in one day as friends,
mhm,
it's that's pretty impressive and magical. And that's what it can do.
mhm.
And that kind of thing has to happen before you can solve those issues.
Yeah.
If we're Because it's humanizing, it's it's creating this foundation of we're humans together, and we recognize each other at least on that
Mhm,
basic level, and care
yeah.
about each other on at least that basic level. And
Mhm,
until you've got that foundation,
mhm,
excuse me, problem
mhm,
solving
mhm.
is it's not going to really work. You've got to
Yeah.
have that mutuality, um, as a foundation to be able to problem solve
Mm,
and to
mm,
work
mm, mm.
together as a team and collaboratively. You've
Yeah.
got to care about each other at some basic level.
Oh, so important. So important. It's reminds me of something I say all the time. We are humans doing business with other humans. And I think a lot of times we forget that. We see each other as task doers,
Yeah. As a
task
dog.
makers, robots or cogs in the wheel of the business. And when you step back and you see the humanity behind whatever it is that you're doing, whether you're a service provider, you're a therapist, group practice owner, you're an attorney running a firm, you're a product-based business selling widgets and doodads and whatever's, um, if you're having a problem with your team, just pause and step back and remember this is a human on the other end of this conversation, this
Yeah.
decision, this task, this job. I just think it just will lead to so much better results all around. Not only will we be better humans to each other, we'll run better businesses, we'll create more impact in the world, we'll, you know, dissolve that conflict that might always be bubbling under the surface, because if you don't address the conflict, I promise you it will not go away. It's not just going to disappear because we stopped thinking about it or we
Mhm.
stopped, acting like it was there. That conflict will only build and build and build. And I think that if we can head it off before it has a chance to really snowball into something catastrophic, we'll have a better chance of building stronger teams, of building more um, collaborative teams. I think there's nothing more beautiful than a team that can work together without needing you to step in every second of the day. And I know so many leaders that I talk to will say things like, I'm just stuck in the weeds of the business, or I'm always putting out fires, or why can't my people just get along? This is a great solution to helping build a stronger conflict resolution capable team
Yes.
that is truly concerned about one another as humans first,
Mhm.
which will then lead to them being able to do a better job together.
Right. And then when we feel like we belong
Mhm,
somewhere, that our team members are people who care about us
mm,
in those basic ways, and even more if we're like really actually friends, then we want to go to work. We want to
mhm,
put our energy in. We want to excel, and we do a better job.
mhm,
Um, and you won't get the turnover or the silent quitting,
mhm,
when people are invested in each other and
mhm,
working together. And then, like you said, problems absolutely are going to come up,
mhm,
but the solutions can be found in a way that, um, people feel good about
mhm.
on all sides when you have that basic foundation of connection with each other as human beings. Um,
Yeah,
it leads to being able to solve those issues in ways that
yeah,
can sometimes be miraculous, that you would
mhm,
never get to unless you had all the pieces, all the parties invested in finding a way that works for each other.
mhm.
And they do it because they care about each other.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, so many benefits to doing this work. Like you mentioned, reducing turnover, let's get rid of quiet quitting, because nobody wants to come to work and be miserable all day. People don't actually want to quiet quit. They quiet quit out of necessity because nobody cares about them, because nobody's making them feel like they belong or like they're heard or validated in their work. 99.9% of people want to come to work and do a good job. We have a responsibility as business owners and leaders to create an environment that supports the whole human. And I think this is a beautiful way to do that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, what a conversation, Janna. Oh my gosh, we have covered so much ground today. I cannot wait to get this conversation in the earbuds of our listeners. But as we're winding down, it's time for our final and favorite segment of the show, which is called Imagine the Impact.
Mm.
And Janna, I would love for you to help us paint the vision for the kind of impact our listeners could create through one key thought, a takeaway, an action item from our conversation today. And it could be something that you've already shared as a reminder or reinforcement, or something new, maybe that you haven't had an opportunity to share yet.
I think a takeaway is is that we all have stories. They're Everyone's story is worth listening to. And when we feel that, when we feel heard and we feel that our stories are important, um, it changes relationships, and that the quality of our listening makes an impact. So when we were speaking at the beginning about um, silence or letting somebody really tell their story, I think if you're in any kind of relationship that's having um, conflict or struggle, um, being willing to give that person time to tell their story. And it doesn't have to be the story that's related to the conflict. It could be a story about something completely different. But just being willing to sit down and listen to each other and taking the time to do that can really have a profound impact on your relationships and how you move forward and can get through hard times, because we're always going to hit hard times together. That's whether we're family, communities, or organizations, we're going to hit hard times together. And when we have those connections, we can get through it and we can get to the other side. And then we're even stronger for that. Yeah, I think so.
I love that. I love that. Imagine the impact that everyone having the same opportunity to share their stories, and not just share their stories, but be heard, be listened to, be validated in that sharing.
I want to, you said if something, let me say this one thing real quick too.
Yeah, go for it.
I think one thing that I don't think we've really touched on, is an important part of our process, is the embodiment aspect. One of the magical pieces of our process is that we're not just hearing and listening, but we take it to the next step, which is an embodiment. And we utilize this concept of embodied empathy. And the empathy is when you step into someone else's shoes, but when you do embodied empathy, you're really stepping into the experience of that other person, and you're feeling what it's like to be them in a full body way. And that when you are being heard, when you are being listened to in that embodied way, it 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 goes so much deeper and the connection is so much stronger. So yeah, if people could listen to each other and step in each other's shoes in a very deep way, and it goes both ways, man, I mean, the world would be a very different place.
Literally world changing.
Yes, it would change the world.
Yeah. So Janna, we're going to need you to get on some bigger platforms here and take this message and this process out to the world, because we need it.
I'm ready.
We need it. We all need it. We all need it. Even if you feel completely self-actualized, I think there is just something about stepping into someone else's shoes and stepping into their story that adds so much more depth to your own understanding of the world around us and how much we still have to learn about one another.
Yeah. And that's exciting.
It won't
ever be boring.
Never, ever, ever. And we'll always have, I mean, imagine how many stories one human contains. Imagine how many stories 7 billion humans contain. There will never be a period without story. And I think the more stories that we can share, the more we can listen, the more we can embody, the more we can impact our businesses, our communities, and the world.
Yeah.
So all right, Janna, people are definitely going to want to know, where can I connect with you? So tell us, where can we connect with you? Where can we learn more? Where do you hang out online?
So my website, our company is Integrative Storyworks. So our website is integrativestoryworks.com. You can find us online on Instagram and Facebook under Integrative Storyworks as well. Um, I'm not quite a millennial. I'm like almost a millennial. So Facebook is kind of my jam.
Okay.
I'm in that older generation. So that's where you'll see the most of us on social media. But yeah, and I'm also Janna Browning is my Facebook profile, and I also post a lot of stuff on there. So yeah, I'd love to connect with people, and my email is janna@integrativestoryworks.com.
Perfect. I will put all of that in the show notes so that way it's super easy for folks to find you, connect with you, shoot you an email. Definitely follow them on Facebook and Instagram and follow Janna on Facebook. I always love seeing your posts. They're inspiring, they're thought provoking, they're comforting. There's just so much goodness that you share in the world in all the different ways and platforms that you have. So thank you so much, Janna, for being here on the Impact Ripple today.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been a delight.
Absolutely. And thank you, dear leader, for tuning into our conversation. I hope that you found it enlightening, inspiring, thought-provoking, interesting. Maybe your curiosity has been piqued. There's so much goodness, I think, that came out of this conversation today, and so many wonderful resources and tools that Janna and her team at Integrative Storyworks has to offer. So please go and check them out. And as always, it is an honor and a privilege to be here with and for you on your leadership journey.
Thank you, guys.